Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from the break. We are online for our 3:20 session on Alumni Engagement Insights from the NALP Foundation report. I'm so pleased to be able to reintroduce two of our colleagues from the NALP Foundation. Some of you will remember that we had the team with us for a monthly webinar last year. It was a great success and sparked such a great conversation about how we can use the data that's reported in this survey process to our advantage. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping reminders. You are welcome to use the chat feature for questions and feedback for our presenters today. And you're also welcome to rename yourself using the three little dots at the upper right-hand corner of your Zoom window to include your institution's name. So without further ado, I'm again pleased to introduce our presenters today. The NALP report, it's the 10th of its kind. It will tell us what the data reported by the class of 2019 reveals. The study is the Alumni and Employment Satisfaction Study. And as some of you might have heard Fiona say off the top, it's late breaking. We are getting this hot off the press, maybe not even on the presses yet. So without further ado, Fiona Trevelyan-Hornblower serves as the president and CEO of the NALP Foundation. In her role, Fiona provides leadership for the foundation's mission to improve the quality and delivery of legal services through research, education, and the expansion of diversity within the legal profession. Fiona previously served as an assistant dean for career development and public service at Boston University School of Law and as the national director of legal recruiting for Bingham McCutcheon. She received her BA from Harvard University and her JD from Boston College Law School. Jennifer Mandry is the NALP Foundation's vice president for research. She provides expert leadership on the methodological, data, and analytical aspects of the foundation's research projects and expertly transforms this data into critical insights to deliver actionable and strategic guidance. Prior to joining the foundation, Jennifer served as a consultant and senior research analyst for Thomson Reuters, where she conducted research within the legal industry and consumer markets. Jennifer received her BBA from the University of North Dakota and has completed additional coursework in advanced and applied research. Better you than me. She serves as an authority on multiple quantitative and qualitative research techniques. And again, we're just so lucky to have you both with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Robin. We are so delighted to be back with you all and are really excited to be sharing with you the data from our Alumni Employment and Satisfaction study. For those who you may not be familiar with the NALP Foundation, we are a nonprofit research foundation focused on the legal profession, and we look at issues around legal education, the pipeline into the profession, diversity, professional development, and a whole slew of other things. So we have a number of signature studies, but we're going to be focusing on one of those today, the Alumni Employment and Satisfaction Study, which looks at alumni employment and satisfaction 3 years after folks have graduated. So as Robin mentioned, we have been doing this study for many years. We produce it on an annual basis. And so the data that we're going to be sharing with you today derives not only from the upcoming class of 2019 study, which as Robin said, it's not even hot off the press. It will be released later this summer. So you are getting a first look at some of this really interesting data, but we're also going to draw on the annual studies that we have had since we started this with the class of 2010. So because we've been doing this study for over a decade now, we are able to track trends, identify some new areas for inquiry, and report on how these early stage alumni are doing. We're going to be sharing a lot of data with you today, but there is even more in the actual report. All of our reports are available on our website. So if you find something is particularly interesting, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, or you can get the reports on our website as well. And our goal today is to equip you with data and insights that will enable you to optimize your engagement with these early stage career alumni. So A little bit of background on the methodology and how we put this study together for those who may not be immediately familiar with it. So the genesis of this particular study was the realization that while the ABA and NALP employment reporting data provided really important information at a specific point in time, 9 and then 10 months after graduation, there was no empiric data about what happened after that, how folks' careers were evolving as they moved away from the legal academy and into the profession. So we decided with our colleagues at NALP to launch this, looking at folks 3 years after the date that they graduated, on the theory that after 3 years, they actually have enough work experience to be able to assess the relative efficacy of their legal education and preparing them for practice. And they've also had sufficient professional experience to start really understanding what some of the key factors are and skills that they need to effectively practice. So all ABA accredited law schools are invited to join this study annually via invitations to their deans, and many of your institutions join this. Since we've been doing this so long, we now have data from over 23,000 alumni. So it's a really robust data set. The report coverage is really comprehensive. We look not only at employment status, whether people are working, not working, practicing, not practicing, but we look at this whole other set of issues. We are not going to go through all of this, fear not, today, but we are going to focus on the ones that we think are most important for you and where the data really shows the most insights for you as you look to engage your particular alumni. So we keep a core set of queries for the study every year to enable us to do that trend and year-over-year tracking that I mentioned. But each year we also think very deeply about what's going on in legal education and the legal profession as well. And we make sure that we add additional queries so that we are responsive to the information that the profession really needs. So this year, for example, in the newest study, we added queries on professional identity formation in response to the new ABA reporting mandates on that. So we'll be sharing that with you as well. And a couple of years ago, we started asking questions about how the pandemic was affecting folks' careers. And although it's all gone on a lot longer than we all thought, we are continuing to track that so we can see the evolution of that. So for the class of 2019 study, we are particularly pleased that we were able to expand the population of schools that were able to join the study this year. We've always had a really robust cross-section of schools, private, public, national, regional, T14, other ranked schools, but we received a generous grant from the Access Lex Institute this year, which enabled us to support the participation of 6 HBCU law schools, as well as additional law schools with significant populations from groups that are traditionally underrepresented in both legal education and in the legal profession. And we're really excited about that, making sure that all voices are heard as a result of that. Data was collected at the end of last year, November 22 through early this year, and reflects the information from nearly 2,000 alumni of 42 US law schools, around 363 from Canadian schools. We're going to be focusing on the US data with you today. As I mentioned, we do tweak this study every year. So we added an additional to the professional identity formation queries I noted, also questions about prior work experience, meaning what kinds of opportunities had these folks had in the workforce between undergraduate and law school, to see if we can start to parse out some interesting information there, what the recruitment timing was for postgraduate positions, and intriguingly, why they are changing jobs at this relatively early stage of their careers. We also, 2 years ago, added queries that will warm your heart, actually asking the alumni, how do they prefer to engage with their law schools, and what are some of the barriers to their engagement with law schools? And we're going to be going over that in some detail, as well as looking at issues around educational debt, remote work, and, as I mentioned, the pandemic's ongoing impact. With all of our studies, but particularly with this one, we look not only at the aggregate data, but we slice the data. So we look at it for a variety of demographic cohorts, look at it through law school rank, and another variety of sets of lenses. So we will be parsing that data with you as well today. So everybody always wants to know right off the bat, how have things shifted? Last year, things were really in flux in lots of different areas given the pandemic. So we saw that in two particular areas, the data really aligned with prior studies. First, in the number of jobs held, we're going to dig into that. And secondly, we continue to see higher levels of mobility for alumni of color, but we did see some shifts, and that's the grouping of things over in green in the right. Little bit more diminution in intentions to seek a new job. We're seeing male mobility levels and female mobilities dovetailing a little more closely than has historically been the case. Educational debt continues to go up. Compensation, not surprisingly, given all the salary wars we all witnessed, are going up. And we're continuing to see major impacts on mental health and well-being, as well as the evolution of the hybrid workplace with folks working in hybrid or remote things. So as we think about what the data shows and about how you can most effectively engage with these young alumni, we need to know first where they are and what they're doing. So let's take a look at that. The good news, and this will warm the hearts not only of your colleagues in career services and their deans, but is that the vast majority of alumni report that they are employed. So yes, the answer for all those stressed out 3Ls is yes, you will have a job several years out. And furthermore, as you can see, the rates have been relatively consistent and very high over recent years. They've been steady at 97% for this newest class of 2019, same for class of 2018, a little bit lower for the prior class, but then a little bit higher for the class of 2016. There are minimal variations by race or by ethnicity or by gender. Now, employment as tracked in this particular chart means any type of employment. So both those practicing law and those not practicing law. The majority of alumni also report that they are employed full-time. When we contextualize this against the ABA and NALP 10-month data for this class that I mentioned earlier, at that point, only a little bit over 80% of these folks were reporting that they're employed. So by the 3-year mark, we're actually seeing a significant increase in the employment levels beyond the ABA and NALP data that's reporting. And in even cheerier news, given that this is all about law school, the vast majority are actually practicing law. So you'll see at the far right column, 86% of this most recent class report that they are practicing law, very much in line with what it's been for the past few years. It is slightly lower than the overall employment, but again, the vast majority of these folks are practicing law. So when we break out the data by some demographic cohorts, we do start to see some interesting divergences emerge. What we can see in this chart is the historic context for whether folks are practicing law, comparing the results for white graduates and for graduates of color. And while we see that graduates of color, that's that green line, had lower rates of practicing law in the earlier years of the study, the classes of 2011 through 2014, the rates get much closer from the class of 2017, but we're also seeing them start to drop a little bit over these last two classes. So that's something we want to keep an eye on going forward. When we look just at the most recent folks, the class of 2019, when we slice the data by gender, we see essentially no difference between the rates for men and women for practicing law. But while graduates of color as a whole do have rates slightly lower than their majority peers, when we further parse the data into cohorts within that, we do see, again, some distinct differences with Black and African American graduates reporting that they are practicing law at a much lower rate, 73%, while Latinx alumni report this at a much higher rate, 92%, with Asian graduates right in between at 85%, very close to the overall numbers. So now we know these folks are working. So where are they working? So where can you find them? And how do you align with their professional interests? So at this point, 3 years out, we see that just over half of them, 51%, are practicing in private law firms, with business and corporations as the next most frequently reported work setting at 16%, followed by government at 13%, and then a smattering in a variety of other work sectors beyond that. When we look at those two top work settings within private practice, more men report this as their work setting, 55%, than do women at 46%. And then we also see more white graduates than graduates of color, 53% versus 45%. When we look at the business and corporation work setting, however, we see rough equivalents for the genders, 17% for men, 15% for women, and actually a higher number of graduates of color reporting this, 22%, than their white peers at 14%. When we look at their overall satisfaction, we see, and very happily so, with that the vast majority of folks are very happy with their current job. So it's important for you as you're going out to talk to people to know not only whether and where they're working, but how they're feeling about it and how they feel about their careers and how their law schools prepared them, because that impacts their appetite for engagement. So as you can see, a total of 85%, that's the combination of the two left columns, report that they're either extremely or somewhat satisfied with their current position. Only 9% report being either somewhat dissatisfied or extremely dissatisfied. So given all the swirl around remote work and the call back to the office, does graduates' work location affect their satisfaction levels? And what we see is really not significantly at this stage. There are not major differentials for this class between the folks who are working remotely, 100% in their office, or hybrid. What we do see is that the higher levels, slightly higher levels, are for those working either 100% in the office or working a hybrid schedule, both at 86%. That's particularly interesting to us because early on in the pandemic, the highest satisfaction rates were reported by those who are working 100% remotely. We think that probably is a factor that people felt safer early in the pandemic being at home. And it was also, a wonderful change for them to have that opportunity to be at home. But as the pandemic is continuing, they're starting to understand the impacts of potential loss of community and connectivity as it extends on. Another important thing, and I know this is a topic of conversation in a lot of your law schools, is the environments that folks come from when they join the legal academy. And particularly as they are looking to go out into the professional workforce, what are the resources that are available to them, whether it's social capital, networking, mentors, etc. So when we look at the class of 2019 data, we can see that under half, 46%, have parents or guardians who completed graduate degrees, and 22% have parents or guardians who did not graduate from college. This is quite similar to the statistics that we saw for the class of 2018 as well. And when we dive into the data even more closely and look at those who report that they have either a parent or a guardian with a JD, the figures get even smaller, 29% overall, but interestingly, it's slightly higher for graduates of color at 32%. But again, we see these significant variations between cohorts within graduates of color, ranging from only 17% of Asian American to 23% of Black African American and 50% of Latinx respondents, noting that they have a parent with a JD or a guardian with a JD. Now, in addition to all of the data that we collect and which we're sharing with you today, we also give graduates an opportunity in the survey to share with us narrative responses. And this is where we get a lot of the meat and you get a lot of the flavor for what the experience of these folks really is. So we asked them to tell us what they think the chief benefits were from their legal education. And they are, as I'm sure you would anticipate, quite straightforward in the responses. They tend to fall into a number of themes that we've outlined here with a couple of samples. So numerous graduates talk about the foundational legal skills, so critical reasoning, analysis, legal writing, research, etc., as being fundamental parts of their experience, which they felt they benefited from in law school. Experiential education gets a huge number of comments every year, including this year in the responses, for two particularly interesting reasons. One, graduates point to it as a real crucible in which they develop practice-ready skills. So there's a lot of colloquy about whether law school actually prepares people. What the graduates are pointing to is experiential education is really a major driver for this for them. The second and related area experiential education gets really pointed to by the graduates is as a direct conduit to employment. So for many graduates, they get connected with future employers through their experiential education, and it is a direct pipeline for them to that postgraduate opportunity. So As you can see, also faculty, networking, and the relative strength of their law school's reputation are also seen as chief benefits from their legal education, as will not surprise you as well. One of the most negative impacts from their legal education is the educational debt that they bear. And we'll look into that in a little bit more detail a little bit down the pike. So we've talked about where these graduates are working, how they feel about their current positions, but there's an additional critical thing to understand about these early stage careers as you calibrate your engagement with them. And that is the consistently high levels of mobility they report at this very early stage of their careers. So this is data that, as a former assistant dean of a career office, absolutely stunned me the first time I saw it. What we see is a consistent and very high level of mobility for these alums. During they're only 3 years out, but at this point, already 2/3 of them have held 2 or more sequential positions since graduation. And you see this ranges from a low for 66% for the class of 2010 at the far left to a high of 71% for the class of 2016, about 2/3 along the right. While women, the green line, have changed rates pretty consistently at rates higher than those of their male peers, ranging from 1% to 6%. The differential is starting to close over these last 2 classes, with males and females reporting having held 2 jobs since graduation at almost the same rate, 69% and 68%. And not surprisingly, we see a dip for the class of 2017. That's the class that was surveyed during 2020. So people were sort of sitting tight, and one would anticipate a little bit lower mobility at that point. We also see that alumni of color have changed jobs more often early in their career than their majority peers. The rates rose from 63% for the class of 2010, again over at the left-hand side, to a high of 76% for the class of 2015. The rates then fell to a low of 59% for the class of 2017. As you'll recall, the whole graph moved lower for that one particular year, which was surveyed in 2020. But now we're seeing the rates have gone back up again, and we're seeing for the last 2 classes higher rates again of mobility for associates attorneys of color. And when we look at this most recent class, the class of 2019, we see that they are very much in line with these trends, with just under a third having held only 1 job since graduation, with the greatest number, 40%, reporting that they've held 2 jobs, and 29%, again, nearly a third, reporting that they have held 3 or more positions already at this point. When we slice these mobility data points by demographic cohort, we see no functional difference based on gender, again, 68% and 69% for men and women, and non-binary as well. We do see higher rates for graduates of color at 72% versus their majority peers at 66%. And again, we also see significant swings within subgroups within graduates of color, with the highest rate of mobility reported by Black African American graduates at 81%, but skiing down to 62% for multiracial graduates. So you can probe mobility in a number of different ways. One is to ask, as the data I just pointed to, how many jobs have you actually had since you graduated 3 years? Another interesting thing to probe, though, is whether they are intending to change jobs in the near future. So we ask that as well. And the interesting thing about this is, as you can see, there's a gradually descending slope here. So folks are reporting at lower and lower levels over the years, with some little blips up and down, that they are actively seeking alternative positions. So it was 24% for the members of the class of 2011. That's that high point over to the left, but only 13% for the class of 2019. We do again see graduates of color, though, saying they intend to seek positions at a higher rate. That's that green line again, from above their white peers, with the differential ranging from a low of 2% to 9 percentage points. Within the class of 2019, we again see similar rates for males and females on intention to seek a new position, although we do see an intriguingly higher rate for non-binary grads, 36%, nearly over twice that of the male and female grads. It's a relatively small cohort though, so that may affect that data. And as we continue to have folks report on that, we'll be interested to see whether that continues. And as I mentioned, we do see a higher rate at 19% for graduates of color, again, with significant variations within that though. So they're changing jobs all the time, apparently. Why are they changing? And we got curious, so we asked. So this data is key for you in understanding the drivers for these recent grads and how to align your engagement efforts with them around the issues that they are most concerned about. So when we looked at the levels of responses for the various reasons, we gave them all these options. We see that the top two reasons were better compensation, bonuses, and attitude or fit concerns. We're not surprised by the better compensation because there was this enormous swirl in the talent market over the last year to 18 months with increased salaries, special bonuses, all kinds of things, and opportunities for people to move and better themselves financially if they wanted to. In the second bucket, the largest group of responses, we see much more things around sort of how you're balancing work and life and how you're professional developing. So it's things like better support for work-life balance at 39%, better benefits at 37%. Then things like wanting more professional development opportunities, wanting more mentors, or not being clear about what their advancement path or their prospects for themselves professionally at particular organizations might be. And then finally, in the sort of third bucket, folks were talking about things like wanting a different type of legal role. Also, importantly, we've seen this throughout a number of our different studies, the increasing impact and concern about mental health and well-being, cited by 27% of these folks as a reason that they are changing positions. We also asked, as I mentioned, about pandemic-related reasons, and we're seeing these being cited at very low levels. You'll see it's ranging only from 7% to 2%. So while these get a lot of attention in the media, and there's a lot of swirl around this, it doesn't seem to be a primary driver for why these folks are switching careers at this point in this early stage of their careers. We do see a little bit higher levels of reporting that they are shifting for what we call support and balance related these ideas or reasons. These are things like wanting a flexible work arrangement, looking for more DEI or DEI support within their organization, or conversely feeling a lack of connectivity or community within their work environment. So now we know whether they're working, we know where they're working, we know how mobile they've been and why they shift. So I'm going to turn it to Jennifer, who's going to share the graduates' responses on how they want or don't want to engage with their law schools. Jennifer.
Thank you, Fiona. So as Fiona mentioned, for the second year of the study, we probed alumni preferences for postgraduate engagement. So how do your alumni want to engage with you? What is their most preferred methods? And then we also probed any barriers that exist for their ongoing engagement with schools. So this data is really important. It gives you insight into how most effectively connect with your alumni as their preferred method. And we do note that not all participating schools in the study or in general have comprehensive career-related resources and support available for their alumni as well. So first, we'll start off with preferred methods for engaging. And we did see, we have the results here in the blue for last year for the class of 2018, and then the green for the class of 2019, the most recent study. And we'll see that really the results were fairly consistent between the 2 years. Far and away, the most popular method for alumni to engage with their law school was networking events. And that's cited by over half at 56%. And that was the same rate that we saw last year as well. And then that's followed by mentoring programs. It was at 43%, and that's a slight drop from 47% with the class of 2018 last year. And then we also see that about a third of the alumni note that alumni weekends and reunions, as well as postgraduate career assistant, and then on-campus speaking opportunities. And then connecting with student organizations and affinity groups followed closely behind with about a quarter at 24%. It's 23% the year prior. But the two most common methods schools tend to use for engaging with their alumni were not the ones that your alumni most frequently preferred. We had only 14% reported service in alumni associations, and 7 reported financial contributions as their preferred method to engaging with their schools post-graduation. And then interestingly, we had 7% this year and 6% the prior year saying they did not want to remain engaged at all with their schools. We also broke out these results further, and while male and female graduates, their leading preferences were relatively consistent, female graduates kind of gravitated mostly towards postgraduate career assistance, mentoring programs, as well as on-campus speaking opportunities at higher rates than their male colleagues did. We also see that graduates of color preferred postgraduate career assistant and student organizations or affinity group events at rates higher than their white Caucasian peers. And also graduates of color were less likely to prefer on-campus speaking opportunities. That was at 25% versus 29%. So we broke out the graduates of color into different cohorts as well. And again, while the preference rate were pretty consistent for those engagement mechanisms, we really did see some important distinctions. And an example would be the overall proportion of those selecting financial contributions as their preferred method. We saw that 13% of multiracial graduates selected this versus only 4% of Latinx alumni. And then when we looked similarly, we see that 69% of Asian graduates identified networking events as their preferred method, while only 49% of Black or African American alumni did so. However, about a quarter of Black African American alumni selected service in alumni associations, but only 11% of multiracial and 13% of Asian graduates agreed with that. So again, graduates were also asked to identify what, if any, barriers existed to their postgraduate engagement with their schools. And again, we saw our results were fairly consistent to what we saw the prior class when we first asked or queried this question. Most, or 80%, reported there was at least one or some sort of barrier that did exist. And the top barriers were limited time, at about 49% for each year, and then location and geography. So those were the two leading barriers. Location geography was at 37% this year versus 32% for the class of 2018. And then that followed by about a quarter of graduate indicating lack of interest, again, for both years. And then we did see a smaller, but it's yet sizable percentage at that 16% this year and 18% last year that identified existing student debt as a barrier. And so that's just really key information, just given the high levels of debt that we see with these graduates. But that is down from the prior year. And then we also had another category, and with that category, we saw such comments as the COVID pandemic, as well as just lack of communication with schools, and then general connectivity were cited as barriers as well. And again, here we do see comparable results for male and female graduates, although the rates for all barriers were slightly higher for female graduates compared to males. And white Caucasian graduates reported lack of interest at slightly higher rate than did graduates of color, 24 versus 21%. But otherwise, we really did not see a lot of other significant divergences here as well. And then again, when we look at within graduates of color, we see that limited time and location geography were the leading reasons for most of the cohorts, although we did really see a variation in the rates. For example, for limited time, they range from 29% all the way up to 58%. And then for location, we saw 34% for Latinx, all the way up to 86% for Native American or Alaskan Native graduates. So given those high levels of mobility that Fiona referred to earlier among graduates 3 years out, we also asked alumni to identify all of the law school resources that they've reached out to or contacted for career assistance after they graduated from your schools. And we had 80% of alumni report that they had not contacted their schools for postgraduate career assistant. And that's a trend that we saw in the prior years as well. And among those who did reach out, most reached out to their career service office. So that was the leading point of contact at 17% this year versus 21% the prior year. While fewer at 9% this year reached out to their faculty member, and that's down from 13% the prior year. And then even fewer yet contacted their alumni office or another administrative office, about 2% each there. So next, we're going to delve into professional identity formation. So given the ABA's new guidelines around this, we did add questions to probe it. And for the first time, our study queried graduates on the efficacy of their law school preparation in professional identity formation and many different components. And graduates were also asked to identify their law school as well as their postgraduate resources that they rely upon for their continued professional identity formation. So according to the ABA, the professional identity focuses on what it means to be a lawyer and the special obligations lawyers have to clients as well as to society. So in this study, we wanted to explore what does professional identity formation look like in these graduates' early stages of their careers and during law school. So for the first time, we did query graduates on the preparation for several different key aspects. And we found that graduates rated all of their law school preparation and lawyers' obligations to client and society and providing pro bono community services very highly. So this was on a 5-point scale for extremely effective, for a 5, and a 1 equals not at all effective. And then the lower ratings were given to their law school preparation and well-being practices, cross-cultural competency, examination of discrimination and racism, as well as reflective thinking. We also inquired about the resources graduates found to be most helpful while they were in law school, and 70% identified clinical and experiential courses as the most valuable to their law school resources for advancing their professional identities. Fiona kind of touched base on, we really do see a lot of comments on the value of these courses in shaping what alumni in their career paths they're going to be taking. And then we have just under a half of respondents identified extracurricular activities as well as career development programs and resources as their top resources. So that's at 42% and then 41%. And that doctrinal courses and pro bono opportunities followed. We had about a quarter each there. And then student affair programs resources were rated the least valuable at that 17%. And because developing a professional identity requires reflection and growth over time, we also queried about the resources that graduates found to be most helpful as they continue to develop their professional identities during their early stages of their careers. So we found that 2/3 of the respondents identified their colleagues and peers as their most valued resource for their ongoing professional identity formation. And often these are the folks that they met while they were in law school. And then we also saw that a half or more respondents cited employers and bar associations, but only 14% designated law school alumni programming as their most valuable source. And then interestingly, 14% said they aren't using anything at this point. So what this tells us is that this really presents a good opportunity for schools as well as firms to be able to assist lawyers as they continue to develop their professional identities, just for example, through additional programs and events. So next, we want to delve into the drivers for graduates. So we'll look at some of the key drivers and what is driving them to make their decision-making process. So first, we'll look at educational debt. So given the high cost of the legal education and also that significant levels of debt that many students incur to attend school, this topic has been a huge top concern. So this study does inquire about graduates' outstanding educational debt. And this is, again, 3 years after they completed law schools. And we can see by this chart that sadly, graduates report carrying substantial educational debt at this 3-year mark. This debt includes undergrad, other grad, as well as law school debt. And overall, this year for the class of 2019, the average debt was about $105,000. That was up from about $95,000 the year prior. And the range is enormous. Debt ranged anything from zero debt all the way up to $530,000 of debt. And again, this is 3 years out of law school. And the median debt was $90,000. And again, that number keeps creeping up. The median is half of those folks would have debt below that amount, and half of those folks would have debt higher than that amount. When we look at the debt by gender, female on average has a little bit slightly higher level of debt at that 110 mark. We also see alumni in color report markedly higher debt levels on average, remaining at this 3-year mark. It's 133,000. And then within the graduate of color, the range is dramatic. We see everything from 80% for Asian graduates all the way up to nearly 140,000 or 165,000 for Black African American graduates. So how does this debt impact job satisfaction? So we examined how the debt relates to job satisfaction at this 3-year mark, and we found that there really was some sort of modest correlation, although, as Fiona reported earlier, majority of employed alumni reported that they're very satisfied with their current jobs. The average satisfaction levels moderately decreased as debt levels increased. And we also asked alumni to indicate the main effects of their educational debt. Some of the most heartbreaking comments that we receive in this study from the alumni are related to the amount of debt that they have. And they report that they feel the weight of their debt in a number of ways. Debt load not only affected their job choices, but it also significantly impacted major life choices, such as when are they going to purchase a home or get married, where they're going to live, and whether or not they're going to have children or when they will have children. And as we noted, the impact of this does grow as these three debt level categories grows as well. So you can see, for example, for job choice, it has relatively little influence with those who have zero debt, 42% for those that have up to $100,000 in debt, and then over half reported it influenced their job choice if they had more than $100,000 in debt. So next we'll dig into total annual compensation. So we ask every year alumni to rate several different satisfaction levels on different aspects of their job. And compensation consistently receives the lowest average satisfaction scores when we probe this. And we also consistently find that satisfaction with compensation decreases as tenure with organizations increase. So this following chart details total annual compensation, and this includes salary, bonuses, and profit sharing. And this is for our most current class of 2019. And graduates reported an all-time high rate of annual compensation this year of over $300,000. It increased to 6%. The year prior it was at 4%, and the year prior to that it was at 2%. So we're starting to see a slow and steady increase trend here. Those who reported annual compensation of over $150,000 rose to over a third. It was at 34% from 28% the prior year. And then we had about a quarter report annual compensation of $101,000 to $150,000. And it's a rate very similar to what we saw the prior year. Although the bulk of alumni are reporting compensation between $51,000 and $100,000, and that's at 37% this year, and that's a decline from the rate we saw last year, which was at 46% reporting that bucket of compensation. So what does this really all mean is that we're really starting to see that impact of the salary wars and just that high level mobility on compensation. And again, as Fiona covered earlier, we see these high levels of mobility, and it's just really starting to couple with higher levels of compensation. So we'll continue to monitor this as we move forward. So a few years ago, we also did add questions to probe the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on a specific set of factors for graduates' careers. And alumni were asked to indicate how these factors impacted them professionally. And we really found that their careers were affected differently. Everything from working from home, which is pretty obvious, that's increased. We have the results here from the 2018 to 2019. But sadly, we see that level of reporting that it affected their mental health and well-being continue to increase year after year. It was 31% for 2018. It's jumping up to 39% for the class of 2019. Also, we see it has a huge impact on the effect of educational loan repayment. And again, that is also increasing, and it's really key just given that high level of debt that we carried or talked about earlier. Many are reporting that they changed jobs, but then in contrast, we also had several graduates report the unexpected benefits that they received from the pandemic, that it positively affected them and their career, such as their work-life balance, also just being able to work remotely and not having to spend time commuting as well. And then we also see that it has an impact on work location. With the class of 2019, hybrid was at 57%. Those working at the office was at 30%, and then those working from home has decreased down to 13%. And then also, when we look at the effect of the pandemic on mental health and well-being, we really see there is a notable impact, especially for women and women of color, as well as non-binary graduates. We also, in the study, as Fiona mentioned, we slice and segment this data by many different demographic and cohorts. So we also look at different law school differentiators. So we segment by different law school tiers, and we really found there are a lot of variances among the different cohorts. And the differences include number of jobs, as well as what work setting your alumni are working in, whether or not they're practicing law, compensation levels, participation in experiential education opportunities, as well as different debt levels. So all of that detailed data and additional slices of that data in categories are included in our full report that will be released soon. So we have provided you with a lot of facts and figures and statistics today, but we want to also leave you with some information on how schools are using the data from our study. Faculty can use it for curricular planning. On the administrative front, being able to take this data and benchmark your school's data against other schools. You can look at it on a national basis or on a local basis as well. And on the alumni development front, we continually hear from schools that participate in our study that it builds a great opportunity to build connectivity in a non-financial way with your alumni. On the admissions front, being able to use the data from the study to support unique or highly regarded aspects of the law school experience. And then for marketing, all of the narrative responses and survey statistics can be used in different marketing efforts, including social media, on websites as well. So I just want to quickly mention that the schools that do participate in our study receive an aggregate report, and that report includes all of the data from all of the schools that participated nationwide. And that full report is over 200 pages in length. It's very robust. It has all of the information that we've covered today, in addition to all the other components that Fiona mentioned earlier on. And again, we slice it by many different factors. In addition to that large aggregate data report, we also provide schools with a tailored report. And what that includes is your own alumni responses. So it's a confidential school-specific report with your proprietary data. And that allows for rapid competitive benchmarking against the other schools, and as well as the aggregate data. And then you also will receive all of the empirical statistics as well as the narrative responses. We want to mention that our next study will be among the class of 2020. Fiona and I are very excited to see what the data is for this study. This is the law school experiences for the first full pandemic class. So we anticipate to see some differences in their data. We will be launching this study in the fall. We are going to be expanding our section on professional identity formation just to aid schools with their being able to report this information to the ABA. And then we also will continue to examine alumni preferences for engaging with their schools, as well as that educational debt component and the ongoing pandemic's effect on alumni's career. And again, all the schools will receive that aggregate report as well as their individual data. And we also want to mention that the individual law school data is confidential, so we don't identify any of the schools that participate in our study. In addition, we want to just note additional research and historic reports that are available on our website. So we have our signature study, which is our update on associate attrition. It includes associate hiring and departure information for specific calendar years. It talks about reasons for departure, further out and down the line, as well as tenure with firms and departure locations. Where are they going when they actually are changing jobs? We also have our PD in the pandemic, and that study explored how the pandemic, the economic crisis, and civil unrest impacted 86 leading law firms' professional development efforts. And then we have our Keeping the Keepers series, which is a compilation of all of our update on associate attrition studies, along with some additional survey questions and data. And this most recent is our fourth in the series. In addition, we host webinars on our NALP Foundation research, such as our alumni study each year, as well as our annual update on associate attrition. We have topical town halls and roundtable discussions that we participate in. And we also frequently present to Citigroup and law school consortia. In addition, we frequently present to groups like yours at different legal and industry conferences. We also most recently attended the NALP Annual Educational Conference in Vancouver and presented some of our results there as well. And finally, I want to mention the NALP Foundation also offers custom consulting services and tailored presentations on specific data of interest, as well as different custom reports. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Fiona or myself at any time, but we also open it to any questions right now.
Great, and we got one good question from Megan at Wake Forest asking if their law school participated, if one of your law school participates, do you get that report that Jennifer mentioned? So yes, if your law school participated, someone at your law school, probably in either the alumni office or the dean's office, has a copy of that report and will get the class of 2019 report. If you are curious about whether your school participated and you don't know, feel free to reach out to us. As Jennifer said, we don't publicly divulge the identities of participating schools, but we're happy to let you know whether your school participated or not, and if so, who the point of contact would be. If you think this data is particularly helpful, also, delighted for you to encourage your school to participate going forward. So Robin has opened up the chat, so feel free to pop any questions in the chat or to unmute yourselves and ask any.
Fiona and Jennifer, I just wanted to thank you. That was so interesting, detailed. I love that you have parsed out how this is relevant to institutional advancement professionals. I will admit I took some screenshots during the presentation. So my first question is, were a member to be interested in having a copy of this PowerPoint presentation? Is this something that you would make available? Wonderful. I see head nodding. Any caveats?
Yes, with the caveat that the full report has not yet been released. So with that caveat, that is when the full report's released. But okay. Delighted. I suspect you're not the only one who is taking screenshots.
Only for my own use. I promise not to post them on social media. And then I will say a follow-up question. I'm curious if a school, IA section member here were interested in taking this to their law school's leadership. What does that process look like participating in the study?
We make it as absolutely easy for schools as possible, recognizing that you are all very busy people. So We send out the invitation to each dean at all 200 ABA accredited law schools in the fall of each year, so that October-November timeframe that Jennifer pointed to. And then it's very simple. There's sort of, a click on, fill in the blanks form identifying who the point of contact at the school will be. Usually the deans don't want to be the one themselves actually sending it out, so it usually goes to the alumni office or someone else in the dean's office. We then provide that primary school contact with a school-specific link, which the school then sends out to the alumni. And we also provide a detailed participation guide that walks you through all of the timeframes for it. We even provide pre-baked language that you can use in the transmission email to your alumni in case that's helpful. Some schools like to draft it themselves from scratch, but sometimes it's helpful to have a basis. And then throughout the data gathering timeframe, we provide regular updates to participating schools so that you know what your participation rate is. And you may say, okay, we're happy we've got 50% of the class participating, that's fine. Or you may say, 27%, we want to move that up a little bit. Let's go out with another reminder. So again, we partner very closely with the schools to make it as seamless, as easy for you as possible. Jennifer is our point person. So if any of you are interested in participating and joining the study, we would love to discuss that with you, and she can walk you through the details, but it's really very, very straightforward.
Thank you. And then you see there's a question in the chat, when the official report will be released for video posting purposes.
So I'm not sure what video posting purposes are, maybe for this video, but the official report should be released within the next month or so. What we can do is we can make sure that we alert you, Robin, as it is released, so that you can then share that information. You can also hop onto our website and pre-order the class of 2019 study if you're interested in it as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. And again, feel free to ask questions in the chat. We have 5 minutes remaining in this session. I am going to hog the floor because I have a follow-up question, or really an observation consistent with the presentation you gave to the section via the monthly webinar. I remain happy to see that our most recent graduates want to see networking programs from their law school alma maters. And my initial reaction is like, well, then show up. But also I thought more about it, and really we are seeing an increase in our most recent graduates attending our in-person networking events, whereas I would say pre-pandemic, they were probably skewed a bit to more established alumni. So that's a sort of surprise for me, but an encouragement. And I'm wondering if there's a particular piece of information that you gleaned from the study that, that surprised you or sort of heartened you, or maybe something you weren't expecting. And I know, Fiona, you kind of touched on that a bit during your presentation, but I'd be interested to hear your response to that.
I think the things that hearten us are the high levels of employment and the high levels of satisfaction, right? Because those are things that you worry about, whether your graduates, feel that they made the right choice in going to law school, whether they feel that they are, having successful launches to their career at this stage. I think it's of grave concern to all of us in the profession, the increasing levels of debt that we see, because the impact is so profound in so many personal and professional ways, as Jennifer pointed to. And I think we're also very concerned about the fact that we have these long-term trends that we're seeing where graduates of color have, higher mobility rates, higher levels of debt, that the differential does not appear to be dovetailing despite all the work that everyone is doing to try and make law school a more inclusive and equitable experience. So I think that's, something for us to all be thoughtful and intentional about. I think we're really intrigued to see what happens with the professional identity formation data. We wanted to get in right at the ground of that so that we can support all of you in law school, since you have to report to the ABA on that now. And so, let's sort of baseline this, and then we'll be able to see going forward whether the efforts that everyone is putting into place are impactful, but also what some of the best practices are, where are schools really finding they're getting traction on that front. As Jennifer mentioned, it's a real opportunity for stickiness with law schools, right? You know, if you really do an effective job developing the professional identity formation stuff within law school, and then you can continue to provide resources to them afterwards, that's a real benefit. We see from the data, they don't really like giving money, right? You know, they don't really love serving on alumni boards, except, you know, the couple people that like having that on their resume. So, you know, recognizing that, you know, may not be the best, you know, at least for these very young attorneys, best way to engage with them. If you want to have these long-term relationships, meet them where they are, provide things like the networking, the professional identity formation, you know, and then there's an old fundraising trope, right? You know, the money follows where the heart is, right? So if they have been successfully engaged with you over 5-10 years as they're getting rid of that debt and getting to points where they're able to provide more leadership, either in alumni roles or financial support, you know, then they're sort of good and close to you at that stage. So that's a long answer to your question, Robin.
Much appreciated, much appreciated. And Jennifer, did you have anything to add?
I would just add to, some of our best ideas and information gathering come from folks like you when we present. So if there's ever anything that is a topic of concern or something that you would like us to probe in depth a little bit more, feel free to reach out to us, because we are always, as Fiona said, expanding our research study to make it most current and most helpful to you all. And so just feel free to reach out at any time and have a discussion with us of what would be helpful.
Yep. If you find you're talking to your dean or talking to alums and saying, gosh, I just wish I had either empiric data for our law school or comparative data about how we're doing, versus our peers on X or Y or Z, we love that. We're the data geeks. We'd love to think, with you about how we can make sure that you get the information that is most helpful and actionable for you.
Wonderful. And we love the data geeks. So thank you again, both of you, for joining us. This was wonderful. We are at 4:20. So we are going into a break until 4:30. When we return, we will be talking about U.S. News law rankings. So enjoy the break. Fiona, Jennifer, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us with you. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.